my studio. I'm Regina Quinn, and I'm here in my studio and my home in the northern Catskill Mountains of New York State. And as I do the paintings that are in this episode, it is my favorite season, which is winter, when the mountains and the woods and the air are so fresh. This session of Painting with Fire is focused on how I paint intuitively, doing something that I call sketch painting. So basically, I'm creating works that are oils over Encaustic, and I don't have a clear destination, just a sense of a place or a feeling or a time. And I just want to work quickly. I don't even start with a composition. I just start with a limited palette of color. I create a base, which is an encaustic panel covered with multiple layers of encaustic medium. I could apply these techniques to any kind of encaustic surface, including, a smooth colored surface, a textured surface, and so on. But for the sake of this demonstration, and also just to be true to how I actually do what I call sketch painting, I wanted to keep it simple. And a lot of my demonstrations, if you've seen them in the past, they tend to be somewhat complex, lots of media, many different stages, and maybe the work is created over the course of weeks or months or more. The works that I demonstrate in this episode were the first two were created in an afternoon. The third little bonus one that you'll see at the end was just less than half an hour. So you'll see that the basic approach is somewhat simple. I keep the palette quite limited, and I'm just using oils in the form of RNF pigment sticks and oil paints with RNF blending medium over the encaustic base. I think I'll start this with a combination of colors that yield a beautiful neutral tone, two very intense, gorgeous colors, cobalt violet deep and Indian yellow. Pigment sticks, and you can see I have just a little bit of the Indian yellow pigment stick, but I do also have Williamsburg oil paints, Indian yellow. So, I'll show how I incorporate tube oil paints with pigment sticks. These two colors are complements. They're warm and cool colors that, as they combine, become more like a neutral tone. They become more of a chromatic gray. And I love intense carbon black as in very small amounts to take a pure hue and bring the value down, blacken it a bit. So I'll keep the palette this simple with these beautiful rich hues mixed with some black, but also extended with the blending medium, which is basically the same material as a pigment stick without the pigment. I use the blending medium to reduce saturation, make the colors even more transparent, translucent. And because I'm working with the oils over a panel that is coated with just encaustic medium, the blending medium allows me to achieve colors that are closer to white, colors that have a high value, and that really completes the range that I can now accomplish because I'm also using the black to darken the values. Sometimes as I paint with pigment sticks over encaustic, I'll pick up the stick itself and apply it directly to the panel. But before I ever do something like that, I do like to work with the pigments on my palette, my glass palette, so that I can get a sense of how these colors interact and the range of colors that I can achieve as I blend them. There's no end to the colors that you can include in a painting. But I think a really good discipline is to limit what you use in a palette and try to get the most out of very few colors that interact well with each other without getting muddy, and work the range of values that are possible with that combination of colors. So I have my yellow, Indian yellow, from the pigment stick, from the oil paint, and I want to make sure that I have plenty of the blending medium so that I can not only mix these colors, but I can also extend them. So here's this beautiful Indian yellow. And I don't care too much about really cleaning the palette knife very much, because I'm just using these two colors with black and with medium to extend. So I'm not going to muddy them, you know, if I get a little bit of one color or the other. Okay. Working with high quality oil paint mixed with the blending medium, you can get results that are really comparable to the wonderful R&F pigment sticks. Okay. So start with your lighter hue. Mix a little bit of the darker hue into it. Very gorgeous color here. Maybe I'll add even a little more of the yellow. mashing and mixing the pigment sticks and combining them with the blending medium results in such a beautiful buttery texture. Maybe I'll try to get something that's a little bit in between. And to kind of complete this range, maybe I'll add a little more violet to this one. Here we have the violet with some of the Indian yellow. Yeah. And a lovely tone in between. So I've long been working with oils, pigment sticks over encaustic or in combination with encaustic. But there was, and I've always painted intuitively, but there was kind of a particular moment last year that kind of serendipitously happened. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about that before I go further with the demonstration. Last summer, I was doing a Zoom demonstration, and we were looking at different combinations of complementary colors and the beautiful colors that you can achieve by blending them. So as people were working on their combinations, I looked for something I could use to, paint some of these different colors from the Indian yellow to this beautiful violet. And the only thing I had handy was an encaustic covered panel. And so I just picked it up and spread the paints on it and thought it just, wow, this just looks so beautiful. And then I just let that, put that to the side. And then I didn't want to waste it. And the colors were so beautiful that I thought, oh, let me just take a brush and see what I can do, what I can create from this. And so I did. I started to brush. I did some scraping. I did some heating with the heat gun. And I also added a little bit of the intense carbon black, like I'll do today. Make the piece a little bit more dramatic. And the result was this piece, which I was so pleased with. And it wasn't based on anything other than working with the paints that I had on the surface, responding to what happened as I progressed, and kind of stepping back and almost, it sounds cliche, but really observing the piece and finding where that piece wanted to go. So painting this way feels very much like jazz improvisation, like a note is played or a color is laid down, another color, there's a response, there's an interaction, and you need to keep being spontaneous and responding in the moment to what happens. And sometimes there's accidents or wrong notes or a hair gets into the paint. But the way you respond to that can just result in something quite beautiful. This piece is now in Laura Murphy's collection. And I've been wanting to go back to paint that way. And I've been thinking, how could I convey what is so intuitive and share that with other people to perhaps inspire? And so it's not like steps, it's more, I'll give, some ideas about color, setting up the work area and the tools that might be helpful. And then a good part of what unfolds really, you just really have to see kind of how the piece went forward, went back, and ended up where it ultimately did. So I like to take some of the colors and apply them to an encaustic panel so that I can really see how they behave and make adjustments if I need to. So as I look at that middle color, it really looks a lot like the darker violet. So I'm just going to put it aside for now and focus on the two colors, the lighter yellow with a little bit of violet and the darker violet with a little bit of yellow. And from those two colors, I'll start to create these much darker shades of them by adding just a tiny bit of black to each of those two. The addition of that little bit of black to that violet makes this gorgeous kind of burgundy color. The black added to the yellow kind of cools it a bit. Through this combination, that violet with the Indian yellow is almost a red. And the Indian yellow with some black added is almost towards a cooler green. Such a beautiful range of colors with such a limited palette. We recently had our kitchen redone, and I saved these extra shelves. So sometimes I just tape some parchment paper or wax paper or palette paper on, and then I can use the rest of the shelf as a work surface. My next step was to take all these beautiful colors that I had mixed and set them up on this little mini palette and organizing them in a way that makes sense to me. I put the more violet color and the version that had a little black next to each other, the more yellow color with the blackened version next to each other, and the purer hues over to the right, and again some extra of the blending medium, so everything is organized and right there ready for me to use on my panel. A few paper towels that I cut into pieces so I don't waste too much. I'll have a variety of brushes. I tend to work with flats, and I also have these flats that are kind of clumped like this, which is very nice for a little bit of texture. Have an angled brush, one of these. and these cheap tipping brushes that are just really nice for creating lovely texture within the oils. I'll put them over here. Grab a few razor blades because I love to do fine texture with razor blades. I have a pin tool, which I don't frequently use. And then I have this ceramics tool. You know, I'll just use it if I want to get a few parallel scratches. I'm mostly going to work on the surface, so it's really the brushes that I care about today. At certain points, I might do a little light fusing, so I have my heat gun. This says it's the same as the blending medium in the container, but in stick form. And I think I'd like to go over the surface with it because it will help me spread the paints in a way that, you know, is very smooth. And that's the effect that I'm going for in this piece. I'm also going to keep the three colors I'm using close by in case I want to apply directly to the surface of this piece. So I think I'm all set, ready to begin. This is a 10 by 10 panel. I've also prepared a 12 by 12 for the second piece, and each of those panels, I'd say, have about at least 8 layers of encaustic medium as the base for these paintings. The general sense I'd like to create with this piece is just a view of the woods looking across our fields on a winter morning. I'm going to start by applying color just with my hands, just rubbing it into the surface. This allows fields of color without really any definition. I'll then go in with the other neutral color that is a little bit more towards the violet end of the spectrum. And again, it's still very atmospheric. You know, there's a sense of the light. It could be in the sky. It could be behind a hill, behind the trees. And I like to start with the light and then work forward with details and with greater darkness. I think I'll like to work some of the darker violet in here. Having multiple layers of encaustic medium really supports the beautiful luminosity that's possible in this approach. The brush strokes are very loose, and I'm just working to create a little contrast, little different kind of directionality to some of these darker colors and darker values. And nothing in particular yet is emerging, although this area will sort of become you know, the distant trees and vegetation and so forth. At this point, I'm thinking I'd like to do a little intensification of the yellow hue. So I go right for the pigment stick, apply it directly, and do some blending. And perhaps this will define, you know, kind of a sky area, or perhaps as I wipe it back, it'll just be some traces that give some of this more brilliant color. work with a chipping brush to start to bring a little bit more texture and variation into this middle ground. As the work gets lighter like this, I'll go in with some of those much darker shades and start to work them in. So I'm building lightness, darkness, texture, variation of the hues from the yellow to the violet and all kinds of mixtures in between. At this point, I'd like to enhance contrast by bringing back some of the light colors. Because this is such nice and oily piece with the blending medium on the surface and the paint's nice and oily, I can easily wipe back with just a paper towel. Now I'll go back in with the pen tool and start to define some of the vertical lines that will give a hint of being trees. I'm not really scratching into the encaustic. I'm really just lifting and moving some of the oil paints. Once I do that, I'll go back in with some finger painting and give a feel of the foliage, kind of going horizontally and breaking up some of those lines so that it doesn't just look like, stripes down the painting. And go back in with a clean chipping brush. And you can see I'm just tapping the surface, and that, in addition to brushing, that kind of tapping creates a lovely kind of texture because the medium is nice and thick on the surface of the painting. I can also use the brush to lightly lift off some of the paint to make certain areas a little bit lighter. Next, I'll go back in with a softer, flat brush and just do some blending, kind of smoothing some edges, helping to define some of the boundaries between sections. And as I brush kind of opposite the grain, kind of pushing the paint off, you can see it brings back the highlights, just like when I went in with the cloth. And I do go back with the cloth, and this time I not only rub off paint, but I go up a little bit into some of the darker colors and pull them down. And it starts to give a little bit of a sense of perhaps some of the shadows or some of the irregularity between the edge of the snow and the woods. Mm-hmm. So with some of my brushwork, sometimes little pieces of paint will fly out into unwanted areas. So I'll go back in and try to work with that little speck, pick it up, blend it in. And I'm using this kind of serrated brush, and that kind of softly gives a sense of maybe more distant foliage. And so I'll work with that for a little bit, and this area starts to recede. As I work the paint, I keep asking myself, what rings true? What looks familiar? Now, as I look at the piece, I'm thinking it would be helpful to give the edges of the piece a little little more dynamism that draws the viewer's eye away from the edge and kind of towards the center of the work, so that the edges don't become dead spaces. Sometimes that's just kind of lightening the value. Sometimes it's just working the texture so that there's a natural feeling of movement from the edge inward towards another area of the piece. Return some more highlights to the foreground. But as I'm looking at the piece now, the yellow in the sky just kind of overpowers things and doesn't feel quite right. So I'll add a little blending medium to kind of diffuse it, and I'll wipe at least some of it off, but also just adding the blending medium, you can see it makes some of those areas glow a little bit more, and they're a little less heavy. So I'm doing this kind of stroke down towards the trees so that there's a nice integration between the kind of sky area and the tops of the trees. Okay, so, all right. So as I look at the piece now, I think I'd like to bring a little more texture into that midground, and also pull out highlights, pull out some paint so that I can create a little more dynamism across that middle section. Sometimes I just lightly scratch with the edge, and other times I'll kind of lay the blade down on the surface and pull it across to lift off more paint. Then I'll go back in and kind of soften things, blend them a bit by brushing. Take some of this again. Blend them. A little more feathering of the edge here, and I think I'll continue to take a little bit more of that Indian yellow out of the sky. I just rub it off lightly there's still traces of the Indian yellow, but as you rub it like this, it yields just such a lovely glow. And go back to edges to do different kinds of blending softly with this brush, and then to get a little bit more texture and variation, I use the chipping brush. Many of the approaches I've used so far are very soft. So now I think I'll go in with the razor blade and scratch some highlights, rub across the surface in ways that pick up the oils and spread it in some unexpected ways, which can lead you to certain, I'm going to almost say artifacts in the painting that, give it life. I particularly like these little shadows that resulted close to that middle section border between the foreground and the woods. And that's one of like the most special little gifts so far in this piece, and so I'll try to maintain that, and I'll work the piece so that it makes sense to have those shadows on that lit area. At this point, I'm starting to enter kind of a fine-tuning phase, and at that stage, I think it's a matter of going back and forth between tools that add texture, lift the paint, and tools that soften and blend the paint. And then, of course, there's always whatever the result is that need to maybe darken or lighten the value. So I think this is a good time to go back in and add a little heat. And what the heat does is kind of soften the wax that I've applied to the surface, and it also tends to enhance some of the textures. And really, this piece is so subtle that I'm just going to really apply a very soft touch of heat. Were I to apply too much heat, all will turn to mush, and I'll lose the definition, the texture, and the beautiful featheriness of this piece. While the surface is still warm and slightly molten, I'm going to go back in with the chipping brush, and I'll just take advantage of this state and do a little feathering and see if there are textures that are very subtle that I might otherwise not be able to create when the surface has fully cooled. I can feel I'm getting close with this piece, and I also feel like there are just some things I'm going to have to do that disrupt it to make it more effective. This is the point where things get kind of dangerous, because you have a painting that is almost good, or that you're almost satisfied with, and you could leave it there, but something within you says, no, I have to push a little further, and as you push it, you can lose it. But you can also bring it to points that are so much closer to what you feel in your heart that you want to express in your painting. I think this is one of the points at which having those darker value colors on your palette that you can reach up into and dab into your piece really is a value, because it just deepens the drama, creates the contrast, and brings a piece to life. As I step back at this point, I think one of the things that's missing is a sense of some of those really strong pine trees that you see their trunks. They're much lighter than the rest of the forest, and they come forward, and I need to add them back in, and I'll do so with the tip of the blade. Then I'll go into some of these other sections and just go back and accentuate a little bit of the lightness of trees. They could be any kind of trees in the woods. Some sharp scraping. These scratches. I'd like to bring a little bit of the yellow highlight down into this area, just to kind of smooth it a bit. I think I'll bring some of the darker color into the upper foliage, just to give it a little more variation and contrast with the areas that I've scratched into and brought in highlights. I'll go back in and pick up some more highlights, lighten the sky, lighten the foreground a bit. Sometimes doing a little more vigorous wiping off. Notice I go from the light down into where there's more color. And what that does is just, I think, bring a little more light into the edges of those trees. So I'm just about done. I'm gonna add a couple more little dashes of color. Do a little bit of feathering of the texture, and also just maybe add a few more scratches to give a sense of those branches. And I think that's it. Once I finished this piece, I wanted to take a little break, step out into the woods behind our house, and just take a moment to kind of soak in what it is that I love so much about the woods this time of year. I love the way the branches are illuminated by the snow that rests on them. And also the lovely textures of the forest floor and the very soft patterns that the shadows create as they're cast by the trunks of the trees and also by the pine needles and bare branches. The colors are fairly neutral, and there's also a really nice range of values. So I think this type of feeling of being in the woods is perfect for this style of painting. So I'll use the same exact palette. You'll also see I use more of the dark colors and also do more with applying the pigment sticks directly to the panel. I think I'll start with the color that is more towards the violet. And I'm going to apply it a little more thickly using the palette knife because this painting, I wanted to have more paint, more drama, more darkness. So again, I'll rub it in and start to create a sense of this middle ground. I think I'll add just a little bit of that lighter color that's a little bit more towards the Indian yellow to brighten up the upper area. Although I don't know exactly where I'm going to hint at shadows yet, I'm just starting to work the oil to start exploring that idea. I'm going to start bringing in some of the really dark colors and just kind of boldly drawing some verticals and some areas that I think I'd like to have go towards a much darker value. I'm also, while I'm at this boldness, I think I'll bring in some of the violet, some of the Indian yellow, and all of this will just kind of intensify what's happening on the painting. That just looks like nothing. So I'll start to see what happens as I work the oils, move them about, add some texture. As I do this blending, I notice the colors look almost like a sepia, but because I have the range of these two colors, it's not a flat sepia, it's not monochromatic. It has a lot more dynamic color range. I'd like to bring some of the shadows that are on the ground back in. So I think I'll work with this violet range of colors and shades. And with the palette knife, think about the direction of the light and start to give us more of a sense of where some of those shadows will fall on the forest floor. I want to scratch back in with the pen tool to bring back some of the scratchy textures, all these branches in the woods, the lower branches that kind of have no foliage, almost like dead branches of the pine trees, but they add an important texture and real sense of the woods. Even if I obliterate them, if I work them in a certain stage of the painting, it's almost like I'm unearthing that aspect of the memory, and it just helps me on the journey towards creating an image that rings true to my experience.
Okay. More of the highlights. Maybe a little distance stuff there.
At this point, with lots of paint on the surface, sometimes I like to go in with a palette knife and kind of apply paint, spread it. You're kind of applying, moving, and lifting all at once.
An interesting effect there. I think the big thing with this approach to painting is just see what happens and follow it. Okay.
As I'm brushing, I'm keeping in mind that I want to maintain some of these vertical lines that kind of hint at being trees without being any kind of defined tree. At this point, I feel like the process of the brushing, the lifting of paint, the blending, the dabbing, it's all almost like a kind of wayfinding, like I'm in the woods, in the midst of things, and certain things start to come into focus, and perhaps I accentuate them, and perhaps I soften them. So I think I'll do some manipulating of the paint with my hands and bring back some of the violet shadows.
Pesky things.
I want to bring some brushwork into the snow just to, because the shadows are being cast not just by the trees but by the branches. And there's also all that forest debris on the floor beneath the snow. So you'll see at this point it's really this kind of dance between textures, moving the paint, bringing back highlights. Another thing that happens is sometimes there's bits of the dried paint. When I squish some of the violet onto the palette originally. I really should have peeled off a little bit of the skin. I didn't realize that it had formed on the edge of the paint stick. So I have these little remnants that show up, and sometimes I want to take them out, and that's kind of tricky. I'll do it with the brush. I'll do it with the razor blade. Try to move it with my hand. And again, kind of you're back to improvising. And think of it almost as if I was playing music and somebody hits an off note, and you work with it and incorporate it into the whole. And sometimes interesting new things happen.
Okay, just enhance a little more of the cherry. Back through here. A little bit in here. Put there. Okay.
I think this combination of building the texture, lifting paint off, smoothing it back in, gives the illusion of things receding into the distance. And I wanted to, things got very soft over here on the left, and I just wanted to add a little warmth to give a little more sense of the glow of the deeper woods. I'll go back in with a ceramics tool and pull out some of those fine parallel lines. I like the softness of the area over on the left, and it feels like deeper woods. And I think if I darken a little bit of that foreground, it'll make it recede even further. So I think I like the way the composition is starting to come together. It feels like you're being drawn into the woods. There's something of a portal, and there's depth, and what's within the woods is softly hinted at, but still quite unknown. I'll clean up the sky, bring some sense of a path, perhaps leading into these woods. Thinking still about the direction of the light and what I might need to do to work on the shadows. So I think I'm close. I'll step back, I'll clean up, get some clean brushes and towels, and be ready to go in for the final phases. So I'd like to keep these strong verticals. Just easier to brush working horizontally, so I'll rotate the panel and just kind of lightly go over. And I just want to move the paint a little, blend it just a little bit, but keep that variation so I have a sense of perhaps light hitting the trunks, a little bit of the texture of the trunks.
Right. Now, definitely need to go in with the texture.
And I'll also keep working to get the highlights right in the foreground. Now as I brush at this stage, I'm starting to lift the paint to give a sense of those branches that are covered with snow and lit by the light coming from the right side of the panel.
Okay, great.
At this point, because there's so many dark values and middle values, you can see that as I lift the paint with the brush, the highlights really come forward. And so even though this process is so indirect and there's so much building up and wiping off, I think what you can ultimately achieve in terms of draw is all the greater.
First, I'll just with this finger see what it does.
I think I'd like to give the shadows that are cast by the trees coming into the foreground, I'd like to give it a little more zing. And so I'm just adding some of the violet and wiping with my hand almost as if I'm going across the surface to define the hill as it recedes over to the left. So I see this little speck or a little bit of hair that I'd like to remove. And whoops. So that little accident, I think, resulted in kind of a happy result. It brought this bit of light in between those trees and brought it down into the snow area. I don't think I've used the heat gun at all in this piece yet, but I would like to do just a little bit at this final stage.
Might just very lightly go over these sections that have the back brushing that give a sense of the snow on those branches.
The heat also helps to dry the oils a little bit faster. I think this kind of intuitive painting works best if your subject matter, whether it's based in some kind of physical reality or totally abstract, I think it's best if it's subject matter that you feel deeply immersed in. So, for example, I spend a lot of time in the natural world in the Northeast mountains, and it's a source of strength, inspiration, connection, and so it's like deep within me. It's not like I'm thinking, oh, how can I paint an attractive landscape? So maybe your source of inspiration won't be the woods and the mountains, it'll be something else. So I encourage you to have that as your starting point. And I think it's a good idea. Like, I took that little break and went out and just said, what is it about these winter woods that really connects with my soul? And contemplated that for a little bit, so I could bring it into the painting. And it's not a representation of those woods; it's trying to express something that's my experience, that I feel when I'm out there in the natural world. So it's been just a couple of days since I did the two paintings that I've demonstrated in this video. And the weather shifted. Most of the snow melted, and this morning I was about to clean up. I cleaned my brushes using baby wipes and try to avoid solvents as much as possible. So the baby wipes and soap and water will often get the oil brushes good. So I was about to do that, and I saw, well, I still have a fair amount of paint. I still have those pigment sticks. I also have that blue panel, which I did with a tiny bit of, I think, a cerulean blue encaustic with lots of encaustic medium. And that panel also had about at least 8 layers of nice smooth encaustic as a base. So I decided to work with that and do really a very quick sketch painting, which I'm actually quite pleased with. So I briefly stepped outside to think about, even though it's gray and kind of dull and flat, what is it that is attractive about this condition? I love the textures. I also love the leaves of the oaks and beech that hang out through the winter. So that subtle texture and the kind of bronze leaves are the two things I really like to capture in this piece. So I approached this piece just the way I did the other two, although this time I started off with the pigment sticks kind of scribbled and blended on the surface. I scratched in with that little ceramics tool and lifted off some paint with a cotton swab. I used the chipping brush to create this lovely kind of grassy texture, and over the blue base it gives this very soft green. And then to hint at those beech and oak leaves, I just dabbed into that yellow mixed with violet and just put these little dabs onto the surface, so it's thicker than any other pieces that I did, and but it adds that little bit of zing. Remarkably, the piece came together in really, I'd say, about 20 minutes at maximum, and I think that really quick sketch painting, this one is probably my favorite of all three. Thank you so much for joining this session. I look forward to interacting with you in the Facebook group. If you haven't joined, I really recommend that you do. And I'll try to answer any questions that you have. But I also look forward to seeing your experiments and where you take this combination of media in each of your own unique voices. Thank you.